Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cisco Community's Expert Series webcast on Cisco SD WAN Cloud on-ramp for CoLocation. My name is Hilda Artiaga, and I am a Community Manager of the Cisco Community and the host of today's event. Before we start, I would like to let you know more about our community. It's an online forum with over 500,000 members where you can get answers to your technical questions prior to opening cases with the Cisco tag. Also, you can make many questions or contribute and have a look to documents, videos, and blogs, which you can actually rate as well. All right, so before we start, there are a couple of events and activities that I would like to share with you that we have on the community. So firstly, we have an Ask the Expert event following this webcast. That is a forum event where you can actually double-check all the questions that you have done on this session. Let's say that if you make your question during the session, but we didn't have enough time to answer to it, or we have to validate some information, you will be able to find this question on this forum event. Also, if a couple of days or maybe some hours after this event, you realize you have another question regarding this topic, you can also place that one in the forum, and Aaron will be helping you to answer it till this Friday, July 19. Okay, so the link for the event is going to be available on the chat. And also for all of you on the audience and among the audience who are Spanish speakers, we would like to invite you for a content that is currently having place on the Cisco community. The idea is that for all people who publish Spanish technical content, they can win prizes from Cisco Press and Game of Thrones. So we'd like to invite you to this game of content. This is open on the Spanish community for Spanish speakers till this Friday, July the 26th. There are very good prizes, so this will be nice for all of you to participate who can speak Spanish, of course. And also, we would like to invite you to become an event top contributor. That is just participate on the community. You can participate on events like this. If you are interested in delivering a session like this or participate in any other event that we have, you're more than welcome to contact us so we can review the details and make you a presenter. I'm sorry. We encourage all people to participate because we provide them awards and we recognize everybody who's here, from the Spotlight Awards to the VIPs. We have different kind of content on the community, and besides from the fact that you can look at them, we would like to encourage you to please help us to recognize the quality in the community. How we do that? Well, if you have a question and then someone gives you an answer and the answer is good, please accept that one as a solution or give it a helpful vote. In that way, you can let us know if things are going well and you can encourage more people to participate. So everything that happens in the community, we take that into consideration. And I was mentioning before, we provide different awards and recognition to people who are around there. So just to start, I would like to introduce you to the presenter that we have today. His name is Aaron Rohyans. He currently works on the SD-WAN product team within enterprise networking as a technical marketing engineer. And as a member of contributor of the team, he acts as a technical evangelist and enabler for partners and customers alike, bringing awareness to the need of Cisco SD-WAN as well as the solution's capabilities. He has been active in the information technology industry for several years with a Cisco certified focus on security, routing, switching, and collaboration. Aaron is graduated from the University of Indianapolis in 2026 with a degree in information systems, and he has achieved his CCIE security designation. So welcome, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. And well, we would like to also introduce you to the question manager who is joining us. Her name is Palak Desai. She's a senior product manager for cloud networking and virtualization technologies. She has over 10 years of experience in product management, technical marketing, and software engineer focused on data center, enterprise, and service provider networking space. So Pat will be helping out Aaron and the rest of the team to answer all of the questions related to this topic. Thank you so much for being with us today, Palak, and welcome to this session. Well, for all of you who would like to have a further look to everything that Aaron is presenting today, to the slides and to the whole presentation deck, is available on the community. So the link is going to be available in the chat, and you can have a look there. And well, we'd like to invite you to submit all your questions. Please do that on the Q&A panel. It's located on the right side of your desk. And if you're on a mobile device, you have the three dots and the option just to select Q&A. Please place all your questions, your technical questions, and all the queries that you have related to this topic just right there. And for all of you who have issues with the audio, we have issues that you can see the presentation, please use the chat. In that way, we can provide you assistance. And just to finish it out, we would like to remind you, for all of you who haven't used WebEx Event Center lately, there's a new WebEx. So in order to be sure that you are following the presentation, please select the menu that is in the middle, just as you see on the screen, and select. In this case, it's going to be Aaron's screen. So please make sure that you select the right window so you are able to follow up everything that's happening in this event. And I would like to thank you everything for today for your attendance, and we hope you learn a lot from this session. So Aaron, giving you the microphone and the presenter privileges so you can share your screen with us, please.
Good morning or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are dialing in from. I appreciate you guys taking some time to listen to me today. My name is Aaron Rohyans. As Hilda said, I'm a technical marketing engineer on the SD WAN product team. I also spend quite a bit of my time on the product team for the new solution that was just launched a few months ago, known as Cloud onRamp for CoLocation. So today, I'd like to spend maybe an hour with you guys just kind of talking about what the solution is, what it does, how it works, some of the components and architecture that you should be aware of if you're interested in a solution like this, kind of what your next steps might be, where you might go, what you might be starting to think about, and that sort of thing. And then I'm not one for a whole lot of slides here, so what I'd like to do is try to burn through some of the slides just to give you an idea and set the context up for you. But then hopefully get into a demo towards the end of the presentation so you can actually see the product in action. You can see how it works from a live demo system. So like I said, we'll start off with, as far as the presentation goes, we'll start off with some introduction and key concepts just to understand what the problem is that we're trying to solve here and what the solution can do to remedy that problem. Then I'll dive into some of the components and architectures, specifically the equipment that's involved with the solution like this, how it's licensed, that kind of thing. Then we'll get into some of the use cases and deployment options. So there's a few ways. Now I'm not going to go through every different iteration of use case that you could utilize this solution for, but hopefully after we get to that point, after you understand how the solution operates, hopefully you'll have a pretty good idea of where you might see a solution like this fit within your own organization. But I'll give you a few highlights, some of the big use cases that we see some of our customers already utilizing this for, and that should hopefully give you an idea of where to go from here. Right? So starting off, introduction and key concepts. The challenge, I guess, that we're all trying to solve here is that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, nobody was really using the cloud, right? I mean, some people were, some people weren't, but the fact of the matter is, right, the problem that we're looking to solve here is if you fast forward to today, everybody's using the cloud in some form or fashion. You might be using software as a service where you're taking advantage of something like Box or Dropbox or Office 365, or you may be taking advantage of, hosting an entire data center within AWS or Azure or Google Compute or whatever the case may be. The point is that a lot of our customers are making this move towards the cloud, right? They're starting to have this fundamental architectural shift of hosting a lot of their business critical applications and a lot of their crown jewels, so to speak, within the cloud. Now, this problem, unfortunately, is even compounded by the fact that not only are we hosting stuff in the cloud, but we're also hosting it in multiple clouds, right? So you may not have resources only in AWS. You might have resources in Azure, too. You might have resources in Google Compute. You might also be taking advantage of Office 365. So there's 4 different clouds that you're taking advantage of. And in some organizations, if you're big enough, you might even consider your own data centers as a private cloud, right? So the problem really here is that we've got a lot of different connectivity options. We've got a lot of different clouds that we're trying to bring together under one common policy, under one common umbrella here, so that we can manage connectivity to and from those clouds seamlessly from one dashboard, from one system. So I like to start off with this particular slide because it kind of helps reinforce the problem that we just introduced here today, particularly with regards to our WAN. Right? So if you think about how we're making this move towards the cloud, again, let's rewind, 10 years ago. If we look at the architecture that we had 10 years ago with the WAN, what Cisco typically recommended to most of our customers, and not just Cisco, but anybody, good WAN design was in the form of what we call backhauled access, right? And so the idea behind this was, if I, as a user within your organization, if I needed to get access to the internet or get access to any kind of cloud resources, my traffic would backhaul through the nearest data center or through the nearest regional DMZ, right? So if I'm sitting in Indiana and I'm trying to get access to, let's say, a data center, or let's say the application YouTube out on the internet, my traffic might go to a data center in New York somewhere where it'll get onto a high-speed internet link at that data center and then off to YouTube. The great thing about that level of access, or that architecture, was the fact that it was easy to control. It was somewhat simple, right? We knew that all of our internet traffic and all of our cloud-based traffic was going to go out of one, maybe two or three different internet pipes around the organization, right? So it was easy to secure it, right? It was easy to put a set of firewalls, IDS, IPS on those connections. If we wanted to optimize those connections, very easy to do. We could put a stack of equipment in each data center, and we could do that very, very easily. The problem, however, is if you can, read between the lines here, is as cloud adoption is increasing, right, and as we're starting to host more and more stuff in the cloud, this method of access doesn't work for us anymore, right? It doesn't make sense that I, as a user, if I'm trying to access Office 365 or perhaps even a resource in AWS, it doesn't make sense that I should have to backhaul my traffic to New York or Texas or California to go to a data center somewhere before I'm allowed to go out to that cloud resource. Number one, because it's just inefficient, right, from my perspective. But number two, and most importantly, it adds a huge latency penalty, right? So overall, it degrades the quality of the application for me. Now, if you fast forward to today, SD-WAN has kind of solved this challenge, right? SD-WAN has been great so far, right? And we do that through what we call distributed access. So specifically, what SD-WAN has ushered in is the fact that we will allow direct cloud access, direct internet access right from the branch. So again, if I'm sitting in Indiana and I need to access AWS or I need to access Office 365, my traffic will leave the branch directly to go to either one of those applications without having to backhaul that traffic to a data center somewhere. That's great, and that's exactly what we want, right? That lowers latency, right? It's fairly simple to manage this solution through SD-WAN and whatnot, but it does bring with it a couple challenges, particularly around security and optimization, right? How do we secure this traffic and optimize this traffic now that it's leaving all of our branches, right? We can't put a firewall, we can't put an IDS IPS sensor, we can't put a load balancer or whatever. It'd be very difficult to implement that at all of our branches all the way across our entire organization. For instance, what happens if we have a low-end appliance there that's just not capable of running a firewall on that particular appliance, right? How do we get around that? That's where the solution today that we're going to talk about, Cloud onRamp for CoLocation, kind of comes in, right? So we took our knowledge of this, this backhauled access model and the distributed access model and kind of asked ourselves, how can we have the best of both worlds, right? How can we deliver the same simplicity that you had with backhauled access without sacrificing the benefits that you get with distributed access? And again, that's where Cloud onRamp for CoLocation comes in. And essentially what we're doing is we are allowing traffic to backhaul to the nearest colocation facility, right? So traffic from your branch users can backhaul to the nearest colocation facility, which may be just a few miles down the road, so you're not incurring a huge latency penalty, but backhaul that traffic to that facility where it can hop onto a high-speed backbone to get out to whatever application that user was attempting to go to. So we'll talk more in depth about that, but this just kind of gives you a lay of the land, or the context for what we're going to talk about here today in the problem that we're trying to solve. So SD-WAN Cloud onRamp for CoLocations, what is it in a nutshell? Essentially what it is it's SD-WAN service chaining using virtualized network functions, okay? So it's turnkey orchestration and automation of those service chains through vManage. Now, you're going to see that in a demo, so I'll show you what it looks like to create those service chains and pump traffic through them. If you don't know what a service chain is, if you don't know what a virtual network function is, that's fine. We'll explain that as we go along here as well. But SD WAN Cloud onRamp for CoLocations is essentially that. It is orchestrating these service chains, orchestrating these virtual network functions all under one dashboard to push traffic through these colocation facilities, through these high-speed colocation facilities, so that that traffic can be optimized or secured before it's allowed to go out to whatever the ultimate destination of that traffic was, SaaS or AWS, Azure, whatever the case may be. Now, as I said, if you're not familiar with what a colocation is, let's go ahead and define that really quick. So a colocation, in a nutshell, is essentially somebody else's data center, right? It's basically a company that has set up a data center that allows other people to use it, right? Now, the cool thing about colocations is you, as a customer, are not responsible for the air conditioning of that facility, right, and cooling it, right? You're not really responsible for the power and the redundancy of that particular building or that data center, right? All you do is rent space from that data center, rent rack space from that data center, and drop your equipment in there. And that data center, or that colocation facility, can provide you internet access or provide you access into your MPLS cloud or your private network or whatever the case may be. But the idea here is this facility will offload a lot of the mundane costs that are associated with any kind of WAN architecture, right? They will provide the building, they'll provide the redundancy, they'll provide the cooling, and they'll provide all of the different interconnects with all of the different major service providers in the area, so that all you've got to do is drop your equipment in there, drop your stack of equipment in the rack there, and then order whatever circuits that you want through that facility, and it's very easy for them to provide that physical connectivity for you, right? So how does this, if we look at this, kind of back up a little bit and look particularly at how the solution is going to work from a service chaining perspective. So if we take all of our users and all of our devices and all of our things and move it over to the left-hand side of this drawing, what you see kind of on the left side where it says small office, home office, branch, campus, and that sort of thing. All of our users, devices, and things are sitting over there on the left-hand side. And we draw a line down the middle of it here. And on the right-hand side of the drawing here, you see our data centers, right? The data centers that we all know and love. These are where you host all your crown jewels and things like that. But you've also got all of your cloud applications, Office 365, AWS, Azure, everything that our users are accessing sits on the right side of this drawing, right? And right down the middle, we draw a line. That line represents our perimeter, right? It represents the for lack of better words, it represents the cloud edge, right? Now that line in particular, that's where we're going to set up service chaining. That's where we're going to set up these virtual network functions. And the idea here is anything moving from the left side of this drawing over to the right side of this drawing is going to have to pass across that line or pass through that line. And since we have this demarcation point, if you will, we can inflict anything we want on this traffic as it's going from left to right. As a for instance, if I have traffic coming from my branch users and that's going out to Office 365, let's assume that I want traffic going to Office 365 that's coming from my branch networks. I want that to pass through a firewall first, and then it needs to go through a load balancer or perhaps a data loss prevention sensor of some sort, right? Or even some third-party application that I want that traffic to pass through first. I can quickly and easily create that and then deploy that service chain or deploy that policy, if you will, in the center of this drawing, right? And then as traffic from my branches moves from those branch locations out to Office 365, it's going to pass through that service chain or pass through that policy. Now, the colocations that we just got through talking about live right here on this line, right here at this demarcation point, right? So the idea here is that the colocation is the closest you can get to the cloud without actually hopping into the cloud yet, right? So in other words, what we want to do is we want to set up our policy and all that fun stuff right there on the edge of the cloud so that we can optimize, secure, do whatever we want to that traffic, and then drop it off onto a high-speed backbone to go into the cloud, right? But Cloud OnRamp for colocation lives at the center of this drawing. It is the device, the technology that allows regionalized service chaining or, creating that policy, that optimization security policy as traffic moves from left to right, right? So what problems does this solve? Okay, what specifically can I use this for? Now, we'll get into some of this a little bit deeper in just a little bit as we progress throughout the presentation here, but I do want to kind of highlight a few things that where you might see this in action, so to speak. Right, so the first thing is if I'm using SD-WAN, okay, or you're considering moving to SD-WAN. Now, before I get too far with this, I do want to mention that although this particular solution utilizes SD-WAN quite heavily, in fact, we utilize the controllers for SD-WAN quite heavily so that we can automate things, you don't actually need SD-WAN to utilize this solution. So if you're still using an older technology, and I don't say older lightly, but if you're still utilizing something like MPLS or DMVPN or GetVPN or just legacy IPsec, for instance, you can still utilize a solution like this, right? So just to kind of get that out of the way. But if you're on SD-WAN or you're considering moving to SD-WAN, how can this solution help you? Well, number one, it can provide for an easier migration. If you know anything about how SD-WAN migrations work, typically you have some sort of an anchor site, right? You've got a site that has both connectivity into the old network and connectivity into the new network. And more often than not, the way we like to see migrations is as traffic needs to go from the old network to the new network, that traffic has to pass through that anchor site first, in order to access the legacy network or the new network, depending on what the traffic flow looks like there. This solution can be that anchor site for you. In other words, as I'm making a move or migrating to SD-WAN, I can set up strategic co-location facilities around the country, around the world, around the globe, whatever. I can set up strategic locations where when users are trying to access resources on the new SD-WAN network, if they're on the old, or if they're trying to access old network resources through the SD-WAN network, they can flow through the nearest co-location facility. The cool thing about that, again, is I can also inflict policy on that traffic as it's going back and forth through the colo. If I want that traffic to go through a firewall, I can do that. If I want it to go through a load balancer, I can do that as well, right? A couple other things, and I'm not going to go through each and every one of these here, but a couple other things to keep in mind here. If you're already using SD-WAN and you're interested, or this solution is kind of sounding interesting to you so far, the other thing that you can look at is remote access VPN integration. A lot of VPN technologies, a lot of SD-WAN in particular, SD-WAN technologies out there today don't have a very convincing VPN integration story, remote access VPN, I should say. In other words, if I've got remote access users that are attempting to access my network, how's that done today? Well, typically those users would VPN into, some firewall that sits in my data center, right? Or sits in, maybe a couple of my data centers around the world. What if I could easily spin up an ASA or a Palo Alto firewall or a Checkpoint firewall at strategic co-location facilities around the whole country or around the globe, right? Say, for instance, you live in the north, right? And there's a big snowstorm coming, right? And we know that all of my users are going to be accessing the corporate network from home tomorrow, right? Wouldn't it be nice if I could spin up a bunch of firewalls on demand at all of my different co-location facilities, and then when my users come to VPN in, they can hit the nearest firewall to them, so they have very high-speed access to that firewall. And then once they hit the firewall, since it's in a co-location facility, now they've got high-speed access into the rest of the organization, right? And all that on demand, all through a single dashboard, right? All right, so a couple other things to talk about. I hit go too quick there. If you are a remote access VPN, if you're looking for remote access VPN technology, right, we just gave you one example of where you might use this if you're trying to provide remote access VPN. But what if also you're trying to anchor access into some of your applications within AWS or Azure or Google Compute, or you just simply want traffic going to each one of those destinations to flow through the nearest co-location first, so that you can inflict policy on it, right? One of the big challenges we have today is with remote users and AnyConnect or any other VPN client that they have on their laptop. One of the big challenges that we have is a lot of times we can't control what they're doing out with that laptop, where they're going, what they're doing, what they're accessing, and that sort of thing. Now we can backhaul that traffic. We can backhaul all their internet traffic to your data center if you want. But again, wouldn't it be nice with a solution like this where instead of backhauling it to some data center that may be all the way across the country, instead let's backhaul it to the nearest co-location facility, which may just be down the street from that user at the local Starbucks, right? We backhaul it down the street, inflict policy on that traffic, and then we let it go out to the internet or wherever it needs to go. And I mentioned earlier, same scenario here. If you're utilizing legacy WAN, right, DMVPN, MPLS, GetVPN, things like that, you can still utilize a service like this as it can help you migrate into future endeavors if you're looking to move into SD-WAN. But you can also take advantage of service chaining still, right? At that point, it just becomes modifying BGP or modifying OSPF to influence traffic to that co-location facility. Really, the only difference here is if you're not using SD-WAN, you don't have some of the automation that SD-WAN brings into the picture in terms of routing traffic to that colo facility. But if you've already got that piece covered, then there's no loss, right? So the first question is, do you utilize carrier-neutral facilities? Just trying to kind of pull the audience here and find out how many of you guys are already using CoLocations. Are you using CoLocations currently? Do you have any plans to use them in the future, right? Or are you still not sure what the heck a colo or CNF even is, right? And if D is your answer, hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll understand a little bit more about what colos can do for you and how they can make things better and make your life simpler, right? Now, moving forward, let's talk about this solution from a component standpoint. Okay, so it's nice to talk about it high level, theoretically, how it looks, how it works, and that sort of thing. But what's actually happening here? So in a nutshell, what's happening is this whole solution is managed by our SD-WAN controllers. Right? So if you're already utilizing Cisco SD-WAN, you're probably already familiar with Cisco vManage, right? Which is the SD-WAN controller or the graphical interface that you'll use to manage your SD-WAN environment. Now, you're going to see that here in a demo in just a few minutes, but this whole solution is managed through vManage, right? So what we've done is we have provided a way that you can create virtual service chains, right? You can create virtual appliances utilizing this solution, and you can stitch those appliances together and create a policy to push traffic through those appliances, all from vManage, all from one dashboard, right? So in that vein, right, in the vein of automation and in the idea behind SD-WAN being zero touch and, automated policy and all that kind of fun stuff, we've also tried to make this a turnkey solution, okay? So the idea behind this is since it registers to these SD-WAN controllers, right, why not provide the same functionality that our routers provide in terms of zero-touch provisioning, right? So when the solution boots up for the first time, there's no need for you to, to log into it and to make a whole bunch of changes to it, from the command line or anything like that. All we're asking you to do is cable it up the way we ask, and then the solution will boot up. And in a turnkey fashion, the zero-touch provisioning fashion will automatically provision and configure itself for you. All you need to do is hop into your vManage dashboard and start configuring service chains. Right. So one piece that I've kind of been dancing around here that you may or may not understand, so hopefully I can fill the gap for you here, is what are we talking about from a physical standpoint? We got the controller piece. We understand, service chaining somewhat, that sort of thing. What are we talking about from a hardware perspective? Well, specifically what we're talking about is 2 CSPs and 2 Catalyst 9500 switches. So more specifically, the CSP5444, a fairly new platform that was just announced, not too new, but announced a few months ago, fairly new platform that is essentially a big honking UCS server that's got a bunch of hard drives in it, a bunch of RAM, and a bunch of CPU capability, right? So it actually has 48 cores, 4 of which are allocated for internal use. But you've got 44 usable CPU cores, right? You got like 192 gigs of RAM, around 5 terabytes of storage in RAID 10. So you got tons and tons of horsepower in the CSPs. Now, what are they used for? What are they? I keep talking about VNFs and virtual network functions. VNFs are essentially, it's kind of like VMware, right? So you may be familiar with virtualizing Windows, or you may be familiar with virtualizing a Linux server and running it on VMware. We are introducing that same concept within the realm of networking, right? So imagine virtualizing a router, or imagine virtualizing a wireless LAN controller, or an optimization appliance, a checkpoint firewall, and a Palo Alto firewall, F5 load balancer, you name it, right? We'll take that software, we'll virtualize it, and run it on these CSPs. So these CSPs are your workhorses to this entire solution. You can run virtually any software that you want on them, and then you'll utilize vManage to stitch those VNFs together, or stitch those VMs together in a logical order so that we can push traffic through it. Okay, and again, you'll see that in the demo. So if that doesn't make sense to you right away, just hold that thought for a moment. And we also have a couple other pieces to this solution, which are the Catalyst 9500 switches, right? You may be familiar with these switches already. There's nothing special here. There's no special code or anything that runs on these switches. These are just normal 9500s, and all they're doing is providing high-speed switching, 10 gigabit switching, highly redundant switching, underlay switching services to our CSPs. These four components, the two switches and the two CSPs, represent a cloud on-ramp for colocation cluster. So if you hear me refer to a cluster from here on out, this is what I'm referring to, these four pieces of hardware, okay? Now, it has a prescriptive way that we ask you to cable it up. But again, if we go back to what I just said with zero-touch provisioning, the idea here is you as a customer, all you need to do is select which colocation facilities around the world or around the country that you want to utilize, what are strategic to your business. You select those colocation facilities, and through a single SKU or through a single product ID, we will send you this cluster. Okay, we'll ship it directly out to the colocation facility, and as long as somebody's out there that can rack and cable this equipment the way we tell you to, right, looking at a picture, right, red cable goes to this port and that port, blue cable goes to that port, that sort of thing, as long as somebody's out there that can do that, this equipment will boot up by itself, auto-provision and configure itself. You're ready to start building service chains. Okay, so it's designed to be very hands-off, very turnkey, very easy to use, okay? Now, you do need to be running, this is actually a misprint here, I meant to update this, but you do need to be running version 19.1 of vManage. Now, this slide references version 18.4 because you will actually see components. You'll see a lot of the menu structures in 18.4. So if you're running 18.4 vManage right now, you can actually play around with some of the cloud on-ramp for colocation menus and whatnot. But officially, we don't support it until version 19.1, which came out just prior to Cisco Live. So, yeah, anyway. We already talked about the CSPs. Now, in the interest of zero-touch provisioning, when we talk about CSPs and we talk about how these things auto-configure itself, these CSPs are actually running a similar service inside them called vDaemon that our routers run, right? So when the CSPs boot up for the first time, they act just like a router. This vDaemon service will kick off, and then automatically through vBond, we begin the process of zero-touch provisioning and auto-configuring the CSPs. Now, I mentioned previously that the switches themselves, they don't have any special code on them, right? We're not running anything fancy on them. How then do they configure themselves? Now, the switches are just a touch different, right? For them, we use a product, or we use a solution called Colo-Configuration Manager, or CCM. Now, I'm bringing this to your attention not because you really need to know about what CCM is and what it does and how it works. In fact, you can tune out what I'm about to say if you'd like, with the exception of we use a hidden service, right, a hidden virtual machine called CCM, Colo-Configuration Manager. Now, this thing automatically boots up. You don't need to do anything. You'll never need to log into CCM. But CCM will boot up, and CCM will actually manage the configuration of those switches for you. Okay, so when you boot your switches up for the first time, even though they don't know how to log in and talk to vManage so that they can provision themselves, they will know how to talk to Colo-Configuration Manager, which will live on one of the CSPs that just booted up. So in other words, the CSP boots up, talks to vManage, provisions, gets itself provisioned and configured. It will automatically spawn Colo-Configuration Manager, and then Colo-Configuration Manager will finish the configuration process for each one of the switches that are attached to it. So question number 2, are you familiar with virtualized network functions, or VNFs? So we just kind of talked about it. We touched on them so far, right? It's the concept of virtualizing a network function, right? I mean, not to sound like Captain Obvious here, but it is virtualizing a router, virtualizing a firewall, a wireless LAN controller, very similar to how you would virtualize a Windows machine. The only difference here is that we're doing it on purpose-built hardware. So we're not just getting an off-the-shelf server, x86 server somewhere, and virtualizing stuff on it. We are building purpose-built hardware that's designed to provide high-speed network functionality for any of the VNFs or any of the virtual machines living on top of that machine or within that machine. Okay, so VNFs, virtual network functions, have you ever heard of it? Right? Do you know anything about them? Are you currently using them? Let us know. Now, in that vein, you may be asking yourself, okay, I kind of understand what VNFs are. I understand what they're doing to some extent, right? I understand maybe how this solution is potentially utilizing them. What VNFs do you support, Cisco? what can we use within this solution? So first things first, you'll see over there on the left-hand side of the drawing, or the left-hand side of the picture, all the different VNFs that Cisco currently supports. These are all VNFs, or these are all manufacturers that we have tested their solution. We have tested their firewalls. We've tested their load balancers, or whatever. We've tested their solution, and we know that it works. Now, having said that, this solution is completely open. So in other words, if you say to yourself, as an organization, hey, I've got some whiz-bang cool Linux server that I like to run, a Python or a Ruby script on that does some special magic to traffic that goes through it, okay? If you have something like that, you can absolutely utilize it. If you have a virtual appliance that is not listed on this screen, that's perfectly fine. In fact, I'll show you in the demo how you can go in and upload your own virtual appliance right into vManage, and you can start utilizing it within your service chains. And this solution will automatically deploy that appliance for you and stitch it together as part of the overall solution so that you can start running traffic through it. Okay, so keep that in mind. But let's look at how this solution works from a high-level point of view. Okay. Now we keep talking about service chaining, we keep talking about service stitching and DNS and that kind of thing. But from a high-level point of view, what's happening here? So basically, your users are going to generate traffic out at the branch location, or they're going to, even data center or the campus, whatever. They're going to generate traffic. That traffic is then going to be sent to the WAN in some form or fashion. Okay, so it's either going to be sent to the local CPE, and the local CPE is going to put it out on the MPLS network, or if it's SD-WAN, it's going to put it out on the SD-WAN overlay, whatever the case may be. You will have a WAN routing policy, some policy within your WAN. Now, again, if you're running SD-WAN, that routing policy is very, very easy to make. But if you're running legacy WAN, you might have to manipulate BGP, OSPF, whatever. But you're going to have some routing policy that basically says, for this type of traffic, I want to send it to the nearest colocation facility, right? To the colocation facility that is closest in proximity to my end user, right? That way we can minimize the latency penalty. That packet is then going to process through the WAN. It's going to be sent to the nearest colocation facility, where it's going to enter that colocation cluster, that Cloud onRamp for colocation cluster that we talked about a few slides ago. Traffic's going to hit the first switch, right, that Catalyst 9500 that we talked about, and then it's going to enter that CSP. Now, based on your WAN routing policy, you might have a number of different service chains. You might have a number of different virtual machines sitting in that CSP that you want to process that traffic through, and that's perfectly fine. Within vManage, you can dictate how you want that traffic processed. Do I want it to go through a firewall first, then a load balancer? Do I want it to go through an IDS-IPS appliance? How do you want that traffic flow to look? Now, in my case, in this drawing, I've made it somewhat simple, right? The traffic is first going to come off the WAN. It's going to go through the switch. It's going to hit a V-Edge router, right, an SD WAN router first. And then from that SD WAN router, it's going to process over and hit a firewall, right? And then once we've hit that firewall, we'll process out of that firewall and then be sent into our ultimate destination, which in this case was Office 365, okay? But the sky's the limit on how you want to process traffic there. Now, looking at it from a different angle, right? Create a packet. That packet comes into the switch, processes through VNF 1, comes in on VLAN A, gets spit out on VLAN B. Once VNF 2 is ready to, or I'm sorry, the second VM was ready to process that packet, it's going to pick up that packet off of VLAN B, process it through its, whatever policy it has, and then spit it out on VLAN C. VLAN C is then going to send it off on to Office 365 or wherever it needs to go. Okay, so getting a little in-depth here, right? I mean, this is a little technically in-depth here, but hopefully this gives you an idea of precisely what's happening under the covers here within that CSP as you send traffic through the solution. So question number 3, while we're on the topic, now you're going to see more of this in the demo, but are you familiar with SD-WAN service chaining? Did you know SD-WAN could do that? Did you know that we could you could dictate how you want traffic to flow through the WAN from a service chaining perspective? No, yes, I've seen it, don't know much about it, or yep, I've seen it, and I currently use policy to implement it. Now, like I said, you're going to see this in the demo here, so I'll show you what this looks like, but just curious what your guys' thoughts are. So a couple of different use cases to talk about here before we get into the demo. Now, I'll make these next few slides fairly quick, but again, I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of where we see this in action with our current customer base, right? So the first one is utilizing this solution as your internet edge. And we kind of talked about that to lead off the discussion here, but we have a number of customers that it makes sense that they backhaul traffic to a data center somewhere because they want to control that traffic and optimize that traffic. But again, it comes with a horrible latency penalty, right? So what they've opted to do, instead of backhauling that traffic to a data center somewhere, they're going to backhaul that traffic to the nearest colocation facility where Cloud onRamp for CoLocation lives. So in essence, what they're doing is creating a new internet edge. Right? All the different colo facilities around the country, or around the globe, around the state, whatever makes sense for you, those will be your internet egress points. And as traffic comes off of your WAN and hits Cloud onRamp for Colo, you get to dictate how you want that traffic to be processed. You can dictate, if you want it to go through a firewall, if it's Office 365 traffic, maybe you intrinsically trust Office 365 traffic, and I just want it to go through maybe an IDS-IPS sensor or something like that. Doesn't need to go through all my big honking firewalls or anything like that. It can, we somewhat trust that traffic. You can dictate all of that, right? But that's the first use case, is utilizing something like this as your internet edge or as a cloud edge, right? So you can actually couple this service with something like ExpressRoute from Azure or Direct Connect from AWS, or even with the Cloud onRamp for IaaS service that SD-WAN provides, Cisco SD WAN. The idea here is that once I'm accessing cloud resources, particularly IaaS resources, what if I still want to implement policy on that traffic? I still want to add in firewall, or I still want to add in optimization capability to that traffic going to AWS or going to Azure. Can I do that? Yes, this is particularly what we see some customers doing. Again, they will strategically select co-location facilities, drop a cluster in each one of those facilities, and as users are accessing resources in AWS, their traffic gets funneled to the nearest colo, goes through whatever chain that customer has dictated for that traffic, and then we will send it across that Direct Connect link or that ExpressRoute link into the cloud so they can access the ultimate destination. One use case that we hadn't really talked about a whole lot, but one that you might be interested in knowing is partner or extranet access. What happens if I'm an organization that has maybe 10 or 15 different business partners that I do business with, and each one of those partners has varying levels of access into my network, or perhaps I have varying levels of access out of my network going to that partner. Only certain users are allowed to access that particular partner or that particular vendor, maybe when I send files or something like that over to them. How then can I create and orchestrate those transactions, so to speak? Well, I can with a solution such as this very simply by creating various service chains for each partner. For instance, partner one, we may not trust them too much, right? So we create a service chain that's got a firewall, IDS, IPS, data loss prevention, all sorts of stuff that we want to pump traffic through before it's allowed to reach that partner. Partner two, maybe we trust them just a little bit more, right? We do business with them quite frequently. We trust that their organization is secure. Maybe I just want that traffic to go through a firewall, and then I'll allow it to go to that partner, right? Partner three, maybe we trust them altogether. We don't even run that traffic through a firewall. We have a router sitting there that terminates a site-to-site VPN tunnel with that partner, right? But the idea here is that this solution can provide a nice anchor point to all of your different partner or vendor access, right? As you bring in new partners, very easy to spin up a new service chain to service that partner with a different policy, right? We talked about employee remote access. I won't go too far into that, but SD-WAN, we also kind of intrinsically talked about this just by the nature of the discussion, but I think you kind of get the idea here that the solution can also be coupled with not only Cisco SD-WAN, but any SD-WAN that you guys are running. Again, if you're running IWAN perhaps, or MPLS, DMVPN, GetVPN, whatever you're running, you can utilize a service like this. In fact, where you see this SD-WAN fabric over here on the left-hand side of the drawing, as that traffic comes into the first colo switch and then hits this first router here in the service chain, that router doesn't necessarily have to be a Cisco router, although it could be, right? It could be any other vendor of SD-WAN router. As long as that router is virtualizable, so to speak, you could have any vendor or you could have any router sitting here at the head end of this service chain and then pushing traffic back to the appropriate service chain that it needs to run through to satisfy your business policy. Okay, so let's go ahead and hop into a demo really quick here. Before I do, just let's talk about some key takeaways here from today's session. Number one, it's an architectural choice how you guys want to utilize a service such as this, right? So we're talking about instead of backhauling access to your data centers, right, and sending traffic out through your internet exit points at each of your data centers, instead, let's select high-speed, strategically sensible co-location facilities around the country, and instead let's virtualize equipment. Let's have a small footprint of equipment in each one of those co-location facilities, and then we will virtualize the different network functions that we need in each one of those facilities to satisfy our business policy. Like I said, firewalls, routers, switches, or firewalls, routers, wireless LAN controllers, whatever you want, and then we'll utilize vManage to stitch those different devices into the user's transit path, okay? As we talked about, it is completely turnkey. It's highly automated. We've designed it to be extremely simple. You don't need to know a whole lot about Catalyst 9500 switches. You don't need to know a lot about CSPs. You really don't even need to know a lot about vManage or how SD-WAN and that kind of fun stuff works. It's a single SKU. You order it, you drop ship it to the co-location facility, cable it up, boot it up, and you're ready to start building service chains. You're ready to start building policy and pushing traffic through each one of those virtual network functions, right? And we talked about all the different use cases that it could also, that it could be utilized to address, right? Now, let's go ahead and hop into a demo so you guys can see this product in action here. All right. Okay, so what you're looking at, hopefully, if that's shared correctly, is Cisco vManage, right? So this is the vManage dashboard. Now, this is in my lab, right? So obviously, I've got a few things going on here that I need to mess with, but for the most part, what you're looking at is a SD-WAN dashboard. So if you're familiar with Cisco SD-WAN dashboard or Cisco SD-WAN, this dashboard should look pretty familiar to you, right? Everything should kind of make sense here. However, if you're not familiar with Cisco SD-WAN, I'll give you just a 2-minute lay of the land here of what you're looking at here. Most everything that you see on this screen is interactable. This is the SD-WAN dashboard, and it is SD-WAN centric, right? So anything that's going on within the SD-WAN environment, you can pick up on it very quickly, very easily through this dashboard. So for instance, across the top, I can see all my different routers. For instance, I've got 8 routers that are up and functioning correctly. I currently have 1 that is down for whatever reason. Like I said, most of these different widgets that you see on the screen here are interactable, right? So I could click on this 8 here, and I could see which routers are reachable, or which of those 8 routers are we talking about here, right? I can see the host name, I can see what IP address they have, I can see what version of code that they're running, and so on and so forth, right? If I've got a router that's down, so for instance here, I think one of my CSPs is down currently. I can see what that IP address is, what its current state is, what model it is, so on and so forth. So I can get some brief telemetry about the network just at a quick glance. What's up, what's down, how's everything functioning? I can look at control status here. So as each of these devices boot up and they create a tunnel or they create a control connection to each of the controllers within the SD-WAN environment, how does that control tunnel look, right? Are all my control channels up? Are some of them having issues building that control channel? You can see here I've got a couple routers. If I click on that partial, my DC1 and BR1 routers are having a few issues. We expected to see 2 connections here, but we're only seeing 1 control connection. So again, this is just kind of giving you a lay of the land in terms of what's going on with your SD-WAN environment. Now, one thing you may have noticed as I'm clicking around and going through here is not only is it showing you some of the SD-WAN telemetry, or mostly SD-WAN telemetry, but within that telemetry, we can also get some basics on how our cloud on-ramp or colocation clusters are doing, right? So for instance, as I said earlier, if I click on this down, one of my CSPs is currently down, right? So I can troubleshoot that later, but just to give you an idea that there are, not only are you getting SD-WAN telemetry here, but you're also getting telemetry on how your colocation facilities are doing, okay? Now, let's go ahead and move into the meat of the demo here. Underneath the configuration menu, if I expand this here, you'll see we've got a configuration menu. Down at the very bottom here, you've got Cloud on-ramp for colocation. As I said earlier, if you're running version 18.4 of vManage, you'll already see this in there, so you can play around with it if you'd like. You don't need a license to start playing around with it. But we officially started supporting the solution on version 19.1, which was released just prior to Cisco Live about a month ago. Right? So I'll go ahead and click on Cloud on-ramp for colocation. Now you can see I've already got a cluster that's already built here. Okay, so I've called it the West Coast or West Cluster 1, right? I've got 2 service chains that are on it. Now, normally, under normal circumstances, when you come in here for the very first time, you're going to get a cool little splash screen that basically tells you, here's what you need to do. In other words, if you've purchased a solution, you've drop shipped the CSPs and the 9Ks out to a remote colocation facility, you talk to that colocation facility and they said, yep, we got everything racked, powered on, and cabled up the way you asked us, okay? If that's the point that you're at right there, you're then going to head into the Configure and Provision Cluster button. Now, this button normally shows up right on a splash screen that we have here if you don't have anything configured. But once you click on that button, this is the screen that you're presented with, right? So the idea here is that you're going to give us some basic information about this particular cluster, because every colocation is just a little bit different just in terms of the IP addressing structure that they use, the management IP addresses that they use, perhaps the VLANs that you were allowed to use as their customer, so on and so forth. So what we need from you is for you to hop in here and just tell us a little bit about that particular colocation facility where you have this equipment delivered. Okay, so you can give it a name. That's completely arbitrary, whatever you want. Same thing for description. You give it a site ID. Now, this is for policy purposes. If you ever want to create policy about how traffic goes into or out of this colo, that's where this site ID becomes important. And then give us a location, so for instance, San Jose or Dallas, Texas, whatever the case may be. Now, you'll notice here down at the bottom, we talked about what the physical components are for this particular solution. We've got 2 9500 switches and 2 CSPs. What we need you to do here is just click on each one of these icons and tell us what serial number, of the serial numbers that just shipped out to this remote colo facility, which serial number belongs where? Okay, so maybe you have 3 or 4 different colo facilities that you're bringing online all at once. You might have a list of 4 or maybe 6 different serial numbers, when you click on each one of these icons. What we need to know from you is which serial number belongs to this colo that you are configuring right now. Right? So you'll select the serial number, you'll click Save. You'll do that for each one of these icons, right? Each one of the switches, you'll do the exact same thing. Tell us which switch belongs to this particular colo, right? Tell us what credentials you want on this device. Now, since these ship directly from Cisco, they don't really have any default configuration in terms of usernames and passwords and things like that. But this is in an effort to set all of that for you. So when these devices check in for the very first time and provision themselves, this is where you can set what username and password you want on those devices if TAC or whoever would ever need to log in and do some basic troubleshooting on it for you. Okay. Resource pool, we won't go through each one of these, but just to give you an idea what some of these mean, right? This is an arbitrary name. You can have an arbitrary description. Service chain VLAN pool, right? So when we are stitching each one of these different virtual machines together, each one of these virtual functions together, as we stitch them together, we need to be able to have a VLAN that we can use from a layer 2 perspective to stitch them together from layer 2, right? The same thing goes for layer 3. We need to have a pool of IP addresses that we can use to stitch those VNFs together or stitch those virtual machines together from a layer 3 perspective. So give us a pool of VLANs that we can use and a pool of IP addresses that we can use. Give us a pool of management IP addresses that we can use as we are bringing these devices up. And one thing that may not be clear to you up to this point, but hopefully this will make a little more sense to you, is once you have started building service chains and deploying those service chains, we will do our best to completely configure those devices for you. In other words, if, let's say, you want to build a Palo Alto firewall and an F5 load balancer or an AVI load balancer or something like that, and you build that service chain and you go deploy it, the reason we're asking for all of these different variables right here is so that when those devices boot up for the first time, we want to be able to pre-configure them for you. We want to be able to provide IP addresses, management IP addresses, licensing information, VLAN information, all of that directly to the device as it's booting up so that you don't have to do it down the road. All you need to do is perhaps log into that Palo Alto firewall and make sure that it's correctly connected to the orchestration component for Palo or AVI or F5 or whatever the case may be, right? So that's why we're asking you for some of this information here. But once you have done that and you've created your cluster, this is the screen you're going to be presented with. Great, this is exactly what we want to see. The next piece is where you can actually start building some service chains. You can actually start pumping traffic through each one of these colos and inflicting policy against it, right? So the first thing I'm going to do here, before I do that, is I want to show you where do we upload or where do we provide these software packages that this solution is going to use. And for that, under our Maintenance tab, we've got a menu here called Software Repository. If I click on Software Repository here, you'll notice that we have a Virtual Images tab here. Right? Now, this tab was introduced back in 18.4 last December. So you may have already noticed it there, especially if you're dabbling in some of the security features that were available or that became available several months ago. But if you click on Virtual Images here, you'll notice that I've got a whole bunch of different software packages already preloaded on this particular cluster. So for instance, I've got an ASA firewall, I've got a Fortinet firewall, an SD WAN router, an AVI load balancer, a CSR SD WAN router. Right, so I've got a number of different images here that I like to play around with as I'm creating service chains. But you'll notice here that you've also got this button here for Add Custom VNF Package. So again, if you find yourself in a situation where you want to run some vendor X firewall and Cisco doesn't officially support that, or you don't see it in any documentation, doesn't mean you can't run it, and it doesn't mean that we don't support it. It just means that we've never played with it before, so we really don't know what's going to happen. Okay, but you as a customer, you are absolutely within your right to go ahead and click on that button there. You can give your package a name, whatever you want. Tell us what type of or who the vendor is, right? What type of device it is, firewall, router, load balancer, or other. what version of package that you're creating. Now, this version doesn't necessarily have to correspond to the actual version that you're running on that VNF or that virtual machine. This can just be your version information. So, for instance, maybe this is version 1.0 of the package that I'm creating, but I might create package version 1.1 sometime down the road that might have an updated version of code inside it, right? As we scroll down through here, you can see where I upload my image here, right? So my image that my virtual machine image that I want to run here. Scroll down even further, you'll notice that we have another tab here where we can provide day zero configuration. Now, this is all the different day zero parameters that we want to feed into this device when it boots up for the first time. Again, if you're familiar with VMware or AWS or Azure, you're probably familiar with like a cloud init file or a cloud init. This is essentially what that is. This is where we provide a lot of those day zero parameters, a lot of those parameters that we want the machine to inherit as it boots up for the first time. IP addresses, VLAN information, licensing information, all of that fun stuff. You can specify that all here under day zero configuration so that when that device boots up for the first time, it's ready to go, okay? As we scroll down even further, this is where we can specify additional things for the device, how many hard drives it needs, how much RAM, how much CPU, so on and so forth. You can specify all of that here within this screen. Now, once I've got that package created, it will show up here under my package repository here. Now I'm ready. If I go back to that configuration menu under Cloud onRamp for CoLocation, and I click on the Service Group tab, now I'm ready to start building some service chains. Okay, so if I click on Create Service Group and add a service chain here, first thing it's going to ask us here, obviously is a name and a description, but it's also going to ask us how much bandwidth does this particular service chain need, right? Do we need a gig? Does it need 50 meg? Now, the reason we ask you this is you might find yourself in a situation where you are providing multiple service chains for various users around your network or for various groups of users around your network. You may want to set it up so that each group of users only has a particular allocation of bandwidth for their particular service chain. And we do that so that we don't overrun any of the other service chains within the cluster. Now, if you're a service provider or perhaps you're a partner that's offering this as a service to your customers, this may make a little bit more sense because you don't want one customer overrunning another customer because they're trying to push 10 gigs of bandwidth or 10 gigs of traffic through this particular cluster and completely saturating it so bad that other customers are suffering. So you can provide a bandwidth allocation here for this particular service chain and tell us how much bandwidth you want to allow into and out of that service chain so you don't affect other customers or other groups of users. Next thing we need to know is what VLAN are you going to hand this traffic out on, right? So this is probably something that's going to come from your co-location facility, right? So when you drop that equipment off in the colo facility, they'll typically tell you what VLAN traffic is going to be dropped off on. And then once it processes through the service chain and it's gone through your whole stack of equipment that you want it to go through, what VLAN do you want us to pass it out on, right? So if the traffic comes in on VLAN 10, because that's what your colo provider gave us, what VLAN do you want it to pop out on when it gets all the way through the service chain? Now, this could be VLAN 10 as well, so perhaps the traffic comes in off of the internet, maybe VLAN 500, and then once it processes through the entire stack of equipment, I want it to pop back out on 500. It's just going to come out on a different device, maybe a firewall WAN interface, right? Last but not least, tell us what that service chain looks like. So we've got some pre-configured service chains in here that you can select from. What I typically like to do is go to this Create Custom option here. All right, so if I click on that and click Add, now we're at a point where we can simply click and drag and we can start assembling our service chain. So for instance, if I want a router to be first, I want this to be my SD-WAN router. Maybe this is for Office 365 traffic. So traffic's going to come into my SD-WAN router here. Then I want it to process through a firewall. Then I want it to go through my load balancer. And then it can go off to Office 365. So I build my service chain like this. Click on each one of these icons and then tell us what version of code you want operating on that router or firewall. Now, if these names look familiar to you, that's from that previous screen that we were in for the software repository, where you could see I had two different SD-WAN flavors, SD-WAN router flavors listed there. But your custom packages would also show up here as well, especially if you would have chosen one of these icons that you had a custom package uploaded for, right? So in my case, I'm just going to choose vEdge Cloud, right? And as soon as I do that, I'll click on the Fetch VNF Properties button. And at this point, it's going to ask me, I can provide an arbitrary name, how many CPUs, how much memory, and how much disk space do you want? Now, do you have to change anything here? No, you already would have specified this when you uploaded the package, but if you want to update this for any reason, you can. So you can see we've got some default values already in here. In my particular case, for this particular package, we also want you to tell us what serial number you want the device to use or what license key you want the device to use, right, as part of that day zero file configuration. What should the WAN IP address be? DNS IP address, WAN gateway. This is all stuff that we wouldn't have known through a day zero configuration file. This is something that you need to provision when you configure the device for the first time. You'll click on Configure. You'll do the same thing for each one of these icons, right? So we'll choose Fortinet for the other one here. Notice here also that there's an HA option that pops up. If the device is capable of high availability, like for instance this Fortinet firewall has the capability of running an HA mode or high availability mode. If the VNF is capable of it, you'll have the option here to check that box. And essentially what happens is when you deploy this service chain, we're just going to build two of them. Right, we'll deploy two of this firewall and stitch them together for you so that if one of those firewalls were to fail, you'd have seamless failover into the other firewall. Same story though, we'll click on Fetch VNF Properties, provide some basic information about this particular VNF, DNS server, domain name, so on and so forth, initial password that you want to use. And then the same thing for the load balancer, right? I think I've got an Avi load balancer in here we'll select. Right, we'll select all of this, give it a controller IP address, and most of this stuff is pertinent just to the Avi controller, but you'll put this information in here. And then once you've done that, you'll go ahead and click Save to save your service chain. Now, I've already got a couple service chains created here, so I've got a SaaS gateway service chain created. If I just click on that and go to View, you'll notice I've got a similar service chain to what I just built. Right? Now, I've already deployed this particular service chain, but once you've done that, you now have the option of heading in under the Monitor menu. We'll go down to Network here. You'll notice a new menu that popped up here under Colocation Clusters. If I want to get any additional telemetry or information about this particular cluster, how many VNFs are running on it, what those VNFs are, how much traffic they're pumping through, that sort of thing. You can get that here through the Monitor Network menu under Colocation Clusters. Now, I've only got one cluster here, so just to show you, we've got 28 CPU cores allocated, about 15 gigs of RAM, so on and so forth. But again, if you wanted to get some of that additional information about each one of these service chains, how it's running, how it's performing, and things like that, I can do that. Now, my service chains were just recently deployed, so I don't have a whole lot of telemetry in here to show you, but I think you get the idea. You can pull a lot of information off of each one of these virtual appliances as you see fit. Now, once you've got your service chain deployed, the whole process takes about 10 minutes or so. vManage is actually going to push the software packages down to each one of the CSPs that are in your colocation facilities. They will automatically boot up. We will automatically stitch those VNFs together through a VLAN and IP address and that sort of thing. Those are to all those different pools that you provided at the beginning. Now you're ready to start pumping traffic through those devices. You got a couple ways you can do it. You can either do it through normal routing, or if you're in SD-WAN, we talked about service chaining. We'll go here under our configuration menu and we'll head into policies. We'll go ahead and create and add a new centralized policy. And if we just hop over a couple steps here, actually, let me go back. First thing you're going to do is create your groups of interest. If you look at the breadcrumb trail up at the top here, again, if you're not familiar with Cisco SD-WAN and you're creating policies, most of the menus and structures that you'll get in within the Cisco SD-WAN vManage dashboard, they all have a little breadcrumb trail that you see up here at the very top. So you can see we'll just kind of walk through this really quick to create a simple policy to push traffic through my new colocation facility service chain that I just created. Right, so the first thing it's asking me to do is create a group of interest. What is it that I want to inflict policy against? And you can see I've got a number of applications that are already defined here. But if I wanted to, I could do it based on the VPN ID. I could do it based on the site ID. I could do it based on the IP address, right? So there's a number of different criteria that I can use to match on to push traffic through this co-location facility. The easiest one, as most customers find, is just to base it on application, right? If it's Office 365 traffic or if it's voice traffic, for instance, I can create a new application list and define that traffic. Once that traffic's defined, I can modify the topology for it. In this case, I'm just going to skip this particular screen, but I could modify the topology if I wanted it to, not necessarily to go through a colo, but maybe to go through another site first or whatever, what have you. The menu I'm concerned with here is under Configure Traffic Rules, right? And then under Traffic Data, we'll go ahead and click Add Policy, add a new sequence type. And you'll notice here that the third option down that you have here is a traffic data policy that you can create for service chaining. So we'll click on service chaining, add a new rule. And basically what I'm going to do is match on a particular application, like for instance, Microsoft apps, like we talked about, Office 365. The action that I want to take on this is to pump it through a service, right? Or through a service that I've created at my co-location facility, right? So I can choose what service I want to pump it through. Now, in my case, there's a number of different service chains that are already pre-built for you in here. But as you are creating service chains, you have the option of defining what each of these service chains mean in your organization. So it might just be a firewall service chain. Net Service 1 might be a service chain that has a firewall, load balancer, and an IDS/IPS sensor in it, whatever the case may be. You will select what service you want this traffic to flow through, right? What VPN your users live on, right? What color you want it to use, so for instance, business internet, so on and so forth. At which point you can click Save, Match, and Actions, and that's it. You've created a service chain policy that can now push traffic through this particular service chain that you've already created, right? Now there's a couple other things here. So for instance, you can also specify the TLOC IP address or the IP address for a specific co-location facility. Like for instance, if you have a co-location facility that you always want this traffic to go through this one co-location facility, you can go ahead and specify that IP address in the blank there. Or you're also, what we're doing now is working on an enhancement to allow you to leave this field blank, and the solution will choose the best performing co-location facility. So you may have a situation where a co-location facility is completely overrun for some reason. Maybe it's just not performing very well for whatever reason. We don't know why. Your branch users, your branch routers will choose a different co-location facility that is performing better to service that traffic. Because remember, since we're just using virtual machines, we're just using virtual service stitching and service chaining and things like that, you can bring up the same service chain in multiple co-location facilities and then have your users utilize the best performing one, right? So that being said, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here. I've talked your ear off enough for about an hour or so. I know some of that can be a bit much. But yeah, beyond that, I'm going to hand it back over to Hilda. I don't know if we've got any additional questions that we want to try to answer. But yeah, outside of that, back to Hilda.
Yes, so for all of you who cannot stay longer on this event, and we are going to clarify a couple of questions from the audience, the recording is going to be available on the community just on the page where you register. So I'm going to place that on the chat for all of you who cannot stay, and thank you for joining today, and thank you so much, Aaron, for this great presentation. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share with you some of the questions from the audience. So let me just select one of them firstly. So the first question is, this solution is only applies for those who have already Colo. And what about if I don't have plans for Colo? What is the best solution with or without SD-WAN?
Yeah. So yeah, very good question. So the short answer is you do not need colos to make this work. The reason we suggest that you use a colo is because it's, number one, it's simpler, and you get better performance. However, if you have no plans of moving forward with a co-location facility, but you like what this solution can offer you, you can absolutely run this in your own data center. If you have your own corporate data centers that you want to utilize and you want to bring up a solution like this within those data centers, absolutely you can do that. There's no reason not to. In fact, we have some customers that do both, right? They have this in not only their own data center, but they also have it in a co-location facility as well, right? So it is flexible from that perspective. It's designed to be turnkey, but there is some flexibility built into it.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron. And we have another one that is kind of related. The question is, why this Colo virtual setup can be in cloud itself? And what is the advantage of hopping between remote and cloud?
So this particular solution, the co-location facility that it typically lives in, or your data center, all that facility is providing is high-speed connectivity to the cloud. Okay, so this solution is designed to sit between your users and the cloud. So where you would see a need for a solution like this is if I want to put policy on traffic coming from my users and going to the cloud, right? So how you do that is up to you. If you want to put this solution in a co-location facility and utilize the high-speed access and high-speed nature of that facility, you can do that. Or you can put it in your own data center and you can run it, if your data center already has very high-speed links to each one of the cloud service providers that you're accessing, you can do that. There's a number of different ways that you can set the solution up. But going to your second question, the benefit for remote access, why would you want to backhaul traffic to to this solution first? A lot of that depends on your business's policy, right? So some businesses have a policy out there that my remote users are not allowed to access the internet directly. They have to go through the corporate firewall, or they have to go through the corporate URL filtering, or a corporate IDS IPS sensor, or firepower, or whatever, so that we can scrub their traffic and make sure that they're going to legitimate websites. A lot of organizations have that type of policy. The problem where that policy breaks down is if I have to backhaul my traffic across the country to get to the corporate firewall so that it can scrub my traffic. It adds huge latency penalties. It's just not good. Where this particular solution shines is instead of backhauling that traffic to to my data center that's out in California across the country, instead, I can backhaul that traffic to the nearest co-location facility, which, again, may just be down the street from me, just a few miles. So I minimize my latency, and I've satisfied my business policy because I can now push that user's traffic through my corporate firewall policy, through my IDS IPS, security policy, or whatever the case may be, and then allow that traffic out to the internet.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. And I have another question is, can WAAS be part of the deployment?
Yeah. Okay. So can WAS be part of the deployment? So the short answer is yes, it can. We are still in testing on some of the WAS appliances as far as bringing up WAE, the application engine on this particular solution. But yes, the short answer is yes, you could virtualize Cisco WAS on this solution. You could utilize it, in a number of different ways. Yes, you could use it. We're still in the middle of testing that and making that seamless, but you absolutely can use it. Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Aaron. I'm going to make a last question here. And if anyone else have another question, this is the moment. So the inquiry is how the solution scales in case of traffic growth. Sure.
Another good question. I forgot to mention that. So if you'll recall, one of the things that we talked about in the presentation was the fact that the solution has 2 CSPs and 2 Catalyst 9500s within it, right? That constitutes a cluster when we talk about the solution as a whole. Those 2 CSPs, we saw that they provide up to 48 CPU cores, 192 gigs RAM, almost 5 terabytes of hard disk space. If you need to grow beyond that, for, maybe you're a service provider or you're just a big organization that you're going to have a ton of service chains. The solution itself can actually scale or grow to up to 8 CSPs. Okay, so you can actually you can keep adding CSPs to the cluster without having to go back and modify anything, really. You can keep adding CSPs to the cluster and utilize those CSPs as additional RAM and CPU and hard disk space up to 8, right? So if you do the math there, 2 CSPs gives you 48 cores, 8 CSPs gives you, however many more. I haven't done the math yet, but you've got quite a bit of quite a bit of CPU, quite a bit of RAM, and quite a bit of hard disk space available to you. If you're going to grow beyond 8 CSPs, if you know you need even more horsepower than that, it is possible. You'll have to create a separate cluster. From a management perspective, it does not add much more overhead, so you don't need to worry about adding additional overhead and management tasks or anything like that. It's not quite as it's not as simple as just adding a CSP, right? You got to create a whole new cluster and add it in, and so on and so forth. Certainly not difficult, but again, you might have 2 clusters if you need to grow beyond 8 CSPs.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Aaron, and thank you for sharing everything. Oh, hold on, I think, we have a last question. Is external router or firewall required for this setup, or a CSP can act as a perimeter device on its own?
That's another really good question. So an external router is not required. Okay, so if you decide that each one of your service chains is going to have an SD-WAN router or maybe a legacy CSR router at the beginning, but a virtual router, you can absolutely terminate your circuits right into a virtual router on your service chains within the CSPs. So a physical router is not a requirement. You can take those circuits and go directly into that virtual router and start pumping traffic through however you want. The only time a physical router is necessary is I think the most obvious use case is within that co-location facility, you might have circuits that you cannot terminate virtually, right? They're not Ethernet circuits. Perhaps it's a DS3 or some sort of a TDM circuit or something like that. So you might have to bring that circuit into an ASR router first. And then hand off of that ASR router back into the service chains. Now, one of the cool things that I didn't mention, but you should know, is this solution has the capability of managing that physical router. So while, yes, you can do all this virtually, you do not need a physical router. If you have a physical router, like an ASR 1001 or 1002 or something like that, you can still manage it through this solution as if it were part of the original service chain. Same thing as if you have a physical firepower appliance, for instance. So maybe you've got a physical firepower appliance and you want to integrate it with some of these service chains. We can actually manage that integration for you through vManage as well. So the solution is flexible from that perspective. You can have physical or virtual connectivity, however you need to get it done.
All right. Thank you so much, Aaron. And with this, we are going to close the Q&A session. For the upcoming questions, we will encourage you to place all of them on the Ask the Expert event following this webcast, which is going to be available to Friday, July 19. That is this Friday of this week. So if you have any further questions or we didn't clarify your question properly, we are going to find the question just right there. All right. And once again, thank you, everybody, for joining. And thank you so much, Aaron and Pallet, for doing a great job answering all the questions around here. And for all of you, well, we would like to invite you to have a look to our social media channels. We're available on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and YouTube, on LinkedIn, or on the application. There you can find more information about future events like this one or any other kind of activities. I would like to remind you that, recording of this session will be available on the community, just on the page where you registered today. Just give us a couple of days and you will find the recording there. And also, if you're looking for further IT training like this one, the one you have seen today, on different languages, and if you can speak any other like Russian, Japanese, Chinese, French, Spanish or Portuguese language, you can find training like that on the different local communities that we manage. The links are available on the chat as well. And also, if you're looking to know more about Cisco technology, the certifications, or you're looking for 4-year IT training, then you can have a look to all the seminars and webinars that the Cisco Learning Network organizes. That you can learn more about everything that is going on right now. And finally, for you having on this event today, we have a special discount. You can redeem a 35% discount on any Cisco Pro title that you wish. The only thing that you have to do is just fill out the survey that we have and enter in the code CSC, and then you will be able to redeem this discount. And well, thank you for your time. You will have a survey coming up to this event. We would like to ask you to please fill it out, so let us know how we are doing, how we can improve, and also what kind of topics you would like to see in further events so we can deliver them to you. And once again, thank you so much, Aaron, Palak. This has been a great event, and we hope you have learned a lot from SD-WAN today and how it can be applied. Thank you. We see you on the next session, and till the next time.